So I'm happy to introduce our presenter, Rebecca Hyams. Rebecca is the Web and Systems Librarian at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, CUNY. In addition to her regular duties, she has put her nerd knowledge to good use, building up a thriving graphic novel collection. So Rebecca, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm excited, and you can see if you have the little video screen open, I'm sharing my video also because I realize I gesture a lot when I'm talking. And so if you want the full experience, but I am actually sitting in front of my personal graphic novel collection, obviously not the one in my library. But so again, going off of my introduction, for those of you that I don't know, or that don't know me very well, I started at BMCC in early 2019, and before that I was at SUNY Maritime for a little over 5 years. So I'm sort of gone back and forth between SUNY and CUNY. And I'm currently our Web and Systems Librarian, but in the past I've also worked as a cataloger, I've worked in ILL, and I dabble in reference and instruction as needed. But collection development is not one of the areas that I've actually trained in in any way. But apart from that, I started reading manga back in like middle school. So, you know, it kind of was always a like undercurrent of my own personal interest. And that picture on the slide there is me in front of our graphic novel collection in our library back in like January, you know, when you could be in a library. So I'll give some disclaimers to get started so we're like all on the same page. Again, I'm not an expert in collection development, so and I don't pretend to be. And my area of expertise in graphic novels is specifically manga. So some of my advice or things I'm saying might just be really specific to that. And to be fair, that is what our students actually read and borrow from us in much higher numbers, it seems, than most of the other things in our graphic novel collection that we've built up. So that's been helpful for me. So I'll start off my presentation with a little bit of a crash course. Just again, to get everyone on the same page, because maybe coming from different levels of experience with this or levels of familiarity. So just to throw some terms out there that you may either see out there in the world or you may hear me say just offhanded because that's my world of where I inhabit. So before we go too deep in that, I actually do have a handout for this session, and I'm going to put the link in the chat. Oh, I have our little chat thing pop out at like 30 seconds after it's open. But let me put this in the chat to everyone. So this is the handout for the presentation. So a lot of what I'm going to cover in the next couple slides are going to be things that you will find on this handout. I've also included title recommendations and things like that. So it's not like a one-to-one. I didn't want to spend my time in this session like telling you about why I think you should buy all these titles that I really love. So I put them all on the guide. So it's manga heavy again. Western graphic novels are not something I know as well. And so I was like, I know that there are other lists out there that are better for that. So I sort of direct you to those, and I have a small list, but the manga is like my recommendations. So I'm going to define specifically I'm going to start with the manga terms because I think those are maybe less well known. So I realized the other night I didn't include manga on my slide, but I'm talking about it a lot. So for those that don't know, manga are comics created in Japan by Japanese people for Japanese people, you know, predominantly. It's sort of opened up a little bit where they, you know, they're also going, oh yeah, right, it's going to be published worldwide. So it's opened up a little bit, but it's predominantly like in Japan by Japanese people for Japanese people to read, and then it gets translated and published elsewhere. And it is almost always in black and white. Occasionally they get a color page, and they're read like Japanese books are, which means they're read from right to left. So a lot of the like people who read manga are just like very used to like picking up a book, and this is the cover and this is the back cover, and then flipping through it this way. So that's just what we're like, you get used to it after a while. They do sometimes print them left to right. They'll flip all of the artwork. It's a big pain. And they do that for like things that are going to be published with a wider appeal than just manga. Like there's a manga version of the Life-Changing Art of Tidying Up, the Marie Kondo book. and they flip that left to right so that people who don't normally read manga can read it like they're used to reading American books. So the next thing I'm going to go over are sort of the big four demographics. Some people call these genres, but they're not. And these are terms you might see, at least two of them appear in the names of imprints. So you have shonen and shoujo, seinen and josei, which are four different demographics for boys, girls, men, like young men and young women respectively. And they basically just refer to like the demographics that the magazines that the manga run in are sold to. So like a shonen manga is something that runs in a magazine that's geared towards like boys 8 to 14, 8 to 16, something like that. But there's a lot of crossover, and there's a lot of cases where the titles that seem like they're in like one demographic actually ran in a magazine for a totally different demographic. And it doesn't really mean that much genre-wise because the boundaries are very kind of open. And the best example I can think of that is that shonen sports series. So sports series aimed at boys like ages 8 to 14 roughly has a huge female fan base, which has nothing to do with the sort of screen view is wide, not seeing entire screen. Sorry, it was like a technical question, and I'm answering it live. I don't know if that's something that someone can help them with. I'm basically just sharing like the slide part of my screen, and I'm hoping that you can see that. If you're not, if you can type in, and hopefully one of the folks on the track can help with that.
I can see your screen, so I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to, but let me
and it might be that they're zoomed in on my screen share.
Possibly.
They're only viewing a part of my screen share. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going. Hopefully get this worked out. So, yeah, I think it's a view option thing. So the next sort of terminology that I might not be familiar, so there's BL, which is short for boys love, and also formerly known as yaoi, or yaoi if you want to mispronounce things, and yuri. And those are both genres that are sort of focused on same-sex relationships. So I put my little icons there to show you obviously which one is which. And they range from like very fluffy, like I don't know how to tell the person I like that I like them, to like very graphic sexual content. So it's just kind of referring to the fact that it's a relationship story of the same-sex relationship. And then the rest of it, like, you know, it's a wide open sort of thing. So using the word doesn't mean that it's always going to be one or the other. It's kind of runs this whole spectrum. So it might be something that you run across. So I'll get a little bit more vocabulary. Promise not to bore you with like too much of a vocabulary lesson. So a word that you may see is the word doujinshi or DJ. And those are not something you would probably find in a library, but they're fan-created or self-published works. Some of them are basically like fan fiction, where they take characters from a series that they like and draw a story. And it could be literally like from having a fluffy coffee shop to graphic sexual content. And others are original works. So that's a way a lot of manga artists just get their art out there directly to the readers. And then there are what are called light novels, which I'm going to like touch on because they're sort of manga adjacent. And they're short novels. They typically have like manga type illustrations in them, and they're very, very popular in Japan, and they've become increasingly popular here in the US, and there are publishers who publish them. And so moving off of the manga stuff, I'll just quickly mention the big two. So if I refer to the big two, I'm talking about Marvel and DC. They're sort of like the giants of the American comic industry. So that's kind of how they're popularly known in some circles. And they put out what are called floppies. So floppies are what you would think of when you think of a comic book. It doesn't have a hardcover or even like a stiff soft cover. It's just kind of paper stapled together. It's like, you know, nice paper, but it's not and they're individual issues. So they're, 20, 30 pages. And if you're not careful with how you put them on the shelf, they get all messed up. So I just wanted to like throw those terms out there. What happened? Okay. So I have this in much more detail on my handout, but this is a list of publishers that are out there, both in manga and in like Western comics. For manga, I have to admit, I was able to rattle this off the top of my head. And for Western comics, I had to like do a little looking up of like, oh yeah, who published that book that we have in our library? Because I couldn't remember who all the publishers were. But again, there's more detail about what each of them publish on the handout. And it's basically, the one thing to point out with the manga is that some of these publishers are actually directly connected to the Japanese publishers of the same works. So like Viz is a subsidiary of a Japanese company that publishes like the biggest manga magazines in Japan. And so they have easy access to like publish that stuff. And at this point, they publish some of that stuff simultaneously with Japan, chapter by chapter. So it's, because they are the same company. And then there's like independent publishers that will just like make license deals to publish things. So there are some interesting pitfalls that you may encounter. Mostly if you're asking people for titles, you're like, hey, tell me what you want to read, and we'll try to get it for you in the library. So just things to be aware of is that in manga publishing in particular, there are digital only and digital first titles. And a couple publishers do this, the big one being Kodansha. They, instead of like putting in this big investment to print them, have inventory, shipping, blah, 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 to get them out there, they'll just publish them digitally. And if they sell really well, sometimes it'll then be printed and sold in bookstores or through library book jobbers. And some of these are titles I would buy from my library if I could, and I've been requested, like, oh, could you get this title? Or like there's a title that I really like and would want to put on my shelf, and they're just not available in print. So there's not really a way for me to do that. So the covers on the slide are all titles that either someone asked me to purchase or ones that I would purchase in a heartbeat for my collection if they were available that way. And then there's also a unique sort of thing with manga in particular. I think it happens with Western comics a little less so, but I think it's also out there. It's the idea of piracy and what are called scanlations. So you may get a request for a title that you find out is not available in English. And the title you may have been given may have been a Japanese title, which doesn't mean it's a scanlation. But sometimes they'll use the Japanese title to refer to a work that's published in English. And that means they probably got it from a scan. And a scanlation is literally they take the pages of the Japanese manga, they scan them, or they, screen cap them if they're digital. They erase the Japanese text, and then they write in an English translation or whatever language. And those end up on these apps. Some people know that they're reading pirated material, and they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. And some people just don't know. Like, because if you Google a lot of these titles, the first things that come up in a lot of cases are these pirate apps. And pirate websites. So people sometimes just don't know. And they legitimately want you to buy it because they liked reading it and they want to read more. And it's just not published, in some cases, not published in English, or not published, the English publication may be way behind where they've read up to. And they want volume 20 and English is only up to volume 5. It is kind of a big issue in the manga publishing industry. Yep, I don't care about Basecamp right now. It is a big issue in the manga publishing industry, and if you're ever on Twitter with manga people, we talk about it a lot. So, I'll get to that, Dana. I'll get to that at the end. Okay, it's there, and I will answer it because that ties into one of my later slides. So then there are odd recommendations. So we're basically all librarians here, so I probably don't need to say this, but just think about who your collection is serving and what their tastes may be, or what their needs may be, or who it is that you're out there for. Because you may want to know, you may want to make sure that what you're getting actually is appropriate. So the example I put on my slide, because it was like an actual thing that happened and I thought it was so weird, is the comedian Jim Gaffigan was like, does anyone have graphic novel recommendations for a 14-year-old boy? He was talking about his son. And most of the suggestions, it was the same thread that I see all the time, which is people chiming in and saying like, have you read Watchmen? Have you read Mouse? Have you read Persepolis? It's like the same 4 or 5 titles, which may or may not actually interest a 14-year-old boy. Like no one was asking like what the kid was into or anything. They were just like, here, just read this one. And the one that got me that I had to take a screen cap of and put on this slide and talk about is that Nia Vardlos, who's the creator of like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, was like, yeah, read Tokyo Ghoul Re, which Tokyo Ghoul is a very, very popular series. It's also very gory, very brutal, and Tokyo Ghoul Re is the sequel series to Tokyo Ghoul. So it's like in the middle of a story, and also it's gory, and I probably wouldn't recommend it directly to the parent of a kid to tell them to read that. So it was like a very weird exchange. So with that out of the way, I am going to switch over and talk about my library's collection. And I'm hoping, oh crap, okay. I had it set to an animation and then I didn't actually run it in presentation mode. So I'll sort of start my journey and explain sort of what happened. And this all took place over the span of like a little over a year, because I, again, haven't been at BMCC for very long. So when I was at my interview, I finished my teaching demo and my interview, and I was being taken on a tour by my now boss. And she was showing me around, and she pointed out the leisure reading section. And out of the corner of my eye, and I'll pop it back on the slide for a second, I see this. So 3 beat up, sad, old previous editions of a very popular shoujo manga from like the early 2000s. It's called Fruits Basket. It's like a very well-known series. But this is like an old edition, and they were falling apart, and they were just kind of randomly there, mixed in with like novels. So I just kind of asked, I didn't want to like nerd anyone out or make it seem strange, and I really wanted the job. So I was just like, oh, you have comics and stuff mixed in with your leisure reading, like asking an intelligent question, and found out, yeah, there's some, we don't really have like a plan, but they're kind of mixed in. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. So I get the job, I start, and like a week or so later, I'm at the reference desk, and one of the other librarians, who's Linda, she's our acquisitions librarian, she comes up to me, and we're chatting, she's trying to like get to know me, and she eventually goes like, how do you feel about collection development? And I'm like, well, you know, I have a little bit of experience, but I don't really like have any particular background in it. You know, my academic background's in music, so I can help with that. The thing I really know is like manga. And her eyes lit up, and she's like, you know stuff about manga? And I'm like, yeah. So that started the ball rolling. I didn't expect that to happen. So I'd been there for like a week or 2, like not very long. I was still unpacking stuff in my office. And I was a little worried about getting overloaded because I had a bunch of things that I knew had to be done because no one had been around to do them. My position was new, and the person who was kind of doing some of my duties had left a while before they hired me. So there was a big backlog of like weird website stuff, and alma migration was going to be on the radar. Like I had other things I had to do. But I was actively encouraged because there was a need that I didn't know I filled for them, and they didn't expect me to fill for them. It just kind of was a happy accident. And so that was really exciting for me. I was like, oh, good, I can make myself useful in more ways than just the ways I was hired. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like how we went about getting the stuff. So the first thing I did was I basically surveyed the environment. So I wanted to see like what we already had and if those things had been getting read, if anyone had requested anything, and then were there titles that we should have that we didn't. And to do that, I literally like sat down with my little notebook and I just started writing titles down of things that I thought we would want to have. Before I started checking the catalog, I was like, let me just make a list of what I think I would like to see, and then I'll start checking the catalog and seeing if they're there. And you can see I kind of like annotated it. My handwriting is garbage, by the way. But so I did sort of make notes. I was like, oh, good, we have Black Panther. That's good. But like, we don't have these things, but we do have these things. So trying to see what was there. And so then we kind of asked around. And so I did not put this question on our whiteboard. At the front of our library, we have a big whiteboard with a question of the week. It's a different question every week. And one morning I came in a couple weeks after I started, maybe like 3. And the question on the board was, what was your favorite anime or manga? I didn't write that on the board. So I believe it was my boss who did that. And so I just started taking pictures of the board every day, twice a day, to see what people wrote down. And some of it were things I expected to see. Like, of course, someone's going to ask for Dragon Ball, and someone's going to ask for Berserk because that's really popular. But then there were some on there that I like didn't expect anyone would say, and they're titles that I liked, but just I was like, no one's going to want to read this, so I'm not going to put it in. I'm not going to put in for it. And one of them I'll point out is on the top there. I don't know how well you can see it. It says "Kimi ni Toldoke." And it's this like really sweet romance story about like a girl who doesn't have any friends and is very awkward and like slowly makes friends and like gets a boyfriend, and they're like a sweet, adorable couple. I didn't expect our students would ask for it, but someone did. And I was like, this is great. I'm happy. But it was a really good way to see, like, because I didn't want to just order stuff that I like or things that I had heard about, because our student body is really diverse, like diverse in terms of age, in terms of background, in terms of interest. Let me ask them what they want. And then I can sort of go from there. So there were those like nice, pleasant surprises or things that I wouldn't have thought of, but like, oh yeah, I could totally get that. If someone wants to read it, I'll buy it. So that was really nice. And then I kind of had to like make decisions about what to put in for. So one of the first things I had to sort of check was, is it in print? Because some of these titles, either, like I mentioned before, they're just not available in English. And in some cases, they were available in English and they're out of print. Either the publisher went under, the publisher lost the license, they just don't print it anymore, whatever. So I had to kind of look for that. Then I wanted to find a series level OCLC record. I used to be a cataloger, so I'm kind of picky about my records. And I didn't want to clog the catalog with like a record for each volume separately. I don't think it works very well for discovery for graphic novels in particular. It just makes it hard to find if you have a particular book. So, but I didn't want to get back into cataloging either. And we decided that that was too far. I didn't need to create original records for series or enhance original records for series if they were really bad. That I would just, you know what, we could wait on that one. I'll wait till there's a better record, because for those of you that aren't catalogers, if you wait like 6 months, eventually someone will make it better for you and then you can use it. So I kind of use that as a guide. And I also wanted to keep things in balance. So again, I didn't want to only order manga. I wanted to make sure I also ordered Western graphic novels, things that would appeal to people who don't read manga but like comics. And also sort of, if I was buying a lot of like action-y, battle-y, fighty things, I also wanted to get some like fluffy slice of life and some romance and some historical stuff. Like I wanted to mix up the genres and also mix up and make sure I wasn't only buying comics, like Western comics by white dudes, and was getting comics by people of color and by women and by like queer people and everyone. Because it's all out there, it's just a matter of like people knowing it exists. So if I can find it, I will order it. And to, again, try to keep those things, try to make sure that the characters are diverse, that the authors are diverse, and then, you know, sort of have this balance. So it's kind of a balancing act. And then I use what's called the 3-episode rule. So there's a thing in anime fandom called the 3-episode rule, where you watch 3 episodes, and if you still don't like it, then drop it. So I buy 3 volumes of a series, and sometimes 5 if it was really long, or if it was an omnibus, I kind of calculate, but which is like a 2 volumes in one, or 3 volumes in one. They get kind of big. But I buy a couple volumes. I don't want to buy just one because it's not maybe enough to get into the story. But if I buy 3 and people are borrowing them, then I'll buy more. So I was kind of using that as my basis, and that's worked pretty well. And this way, if I buy 3 and they sit there and no one reads them, it's only 3 volumes. It's not like I bought 40 volumes of something. So to get the titles ordered, I worked with our acquisitions librarian, and I had to like learn our workflow because I was super new. And I did have some challenges in finding good OCLC records, but I think I like eventually, sort of found my groove. What we ended up doing, at first I was like, do you want me to find the records and send them to you? And she's like, no, it's fine, I'll find them. And she really quickly realized she was in over her head and this was not going to work. So we decided that I would actually pick the OCLC record and send her the OCLC record number. She likes to put the actual OCLC record in when she orders. So that's what we were doing. So I basically picked the record and then we put it in that way. And what we learned was, as things started coming in, Coots doesn't always send things in order, which when you're dealing with a series in order really sucks. So that was a problem. And CUNY has a little bit of a, to me, odd cataloging workflow because I'm still kind of new to it. Some of our volumes, if they didn't have a record that met certain standards, they would go to central cataloging and not to our library directly. So there was kind of like some things would come right to us and some things would go to central cataloging, and then they'd be in a backlog with other titles from other campuses. And so sometimes that was why things would come out of order or things would be delayed. So there was that was just something we had to work around. I think we've mostly gotten around that at this point. So let me talk a little bit about like where our collection lives. So when I arrived, as I sort of showed earlier, there was comics in our leisure reading section, which is near our circulation desk. But then the bulk of our graphic novels were actually in the stacks, in PN, way in the back where you need a map to get to. And people don't tend to go back there for fun. And our leisure reading section was by author, and the stacks were by LC call numbers. And for graphic novels and manga in particular, by author is not really the best way to shelve them, because even I'm guilty of like not knowing the name of the author of the series that I like all the time. So people refer to things by title. And then for, Batman, like DC changes the teams, or the teams change all the time and different people write Batman. But don't you want to put all your Batman together so people can find all your Batman? That's the example I use. Obviously, I don't know a lot about Batman. I don't know why I use that as my example. But so we knew that the shelving would open up. So there was kind of this like, let's bring all our graphic novels together, shelve them in a way that makes sense for them, and like get them all in one spot. So last June, there was a section that freed up because of a weeding project. So the section, like one section of books was able to move somewhere else because of the weeding, and that freed up a corner of bookcase sort of opposite our circulation desk. So I went through, pulled all of our graphic novels and all of our manga that was already there, and we batch processed them to give them a new collection, a new location, trying to use Alma terms, and for the holdings to stay shelved by title. And then as new titles came in, we were like, okay, these are all going to go in comics. That's the code we gave it. So I got some pictures here. The picture on the left is the cart that I pulled all of the comics on. I didn't realize quite how many there were when I pulled the cart over. Excuse me. So that got really full really fast. And it grew rapidly over time. So that picture on the right is about February of this year. At some point, I had to take the the books that were facing out, and put them back spine out because I ran out of room again. So it's grown very rapidly. I was very fortunate in that regard. Our acquisitions person has told me she would rather buy graphic novels that people are going to borrow than academic monographs that no one will ever touch. So, and it's worked well. Also, graphic novels tend to be like relatively cheap compared to academic monographs, so we can get a lot of them for the same price you'd get one academic monograph. So we had some snags and bumps in the road. We didn't have any special labels at first for our graphic novels. And so we told, so the circulation people told the part-timers who were shelving, like, oh yeah, if they're graphic novels, put them over here. But not all of them would look and see that the 3 letters on the spine label were the title and not the author. So they would get misshelved in the wrong collection. And so things would be missing. So the quick solution was to stick green dots on them while we waited to be able to put in a Demco order. And then we bought what I call the good graphic novel the good graphic novel labels. I've seen some ugly ones, and the one that I put on my slide is the one that I like. I have a preference. And so even though we told tech services that we were going to make this change and do this, occasionally books would go through tech services and end up in the wrong collection. It depended on who was processing them. So what we decided to fix that was we would have a review shelf. So as things that looked like graphic novels came in, they went on a shelf for me to check. And occasionally like juvenile books or other things would end up on my shelf. And I go, no, this goes somewhere else. And I would kind of keep an eye out for anything that needed to go in graphic novels. And then we did have some Coots issues where they kept sending them with call numbers because we had to do shelf ready with them. And we had to have them fix that. But I think over time we've gotten those snags worked out. So talk a little bit of the outreach that I've done. Excuse me. So this was my first display in our library, and I was very excited. So towards the end of last spring semester, so not this spring, but last spring when we were there, the graphic novel started showing up, and we wanted to do like a summer reading display, something fun. So Kathleen, my boss, suggested that I do a display right at the front of the library. We have these display shelves, and so I just put them up as they came in, and students would actually stop and look at it. A lot of times they might like glance at it, but they just keep walking. And this display, they really like, they were like, wait, we have this? And they would stop and ask. And some of the titles, I would put them on the shelf and I'd walk away and I'd come back and they'd be gone because someone borrowed it. So I felt very good about, that because it was very catchy. And I tried to like mix up like what I put on the front and on the sides just to like draw people's eye, and like if this thing didn't catch their attention, this one would. So again, trying to like sort of play the different demographics, the different genres, the different styles. Everyone has their own taste. And then I put a suggestion box. So you might be able to see on this slide, there's taped to the side of the shelf, there's a little blue box. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I made a suggestion box. I made it out of duct tape and a recycled soda box, and I attached a pen to it with duct tape. Like I was just like, this is totally DIY, super cheap, recycled. I'm just gonna like tape it onto the thing, and that worked. So I built a suggestion box and I made little slips, and I just put it there to see what would happen. And I got about 30 suggestions. So like not an overwhelming number, but it was interesting to see what people were asking for that I may have not expected them to want to read, or may have not expected them to ask for. And so in some cases, there were titles that I had already ordered and hadn't arrived yet. So I felt really good about those. Like, someone wants to read this because people are asking me for it and we haven't even gotten it yet. So that was good. So at first, our collection didn't come close to filling its shelving. So I would tend to use the empty space on the shelves in that corner to sort of make a display to catch people's attention, because it was kind of off in a weird spot. So try to vary the genres and styles. Again, I tried to go like 50-50 Western comics and manga, again, to try to like, if this thing won't interest you, this one will. And eventually over time, as the collection grew and more things that we ordered showed up, I had less and less space to make those displays. And I got really lucky again. There was a display shelf that we had with zines on it, and we moved the zine somewhere else, and this display shelf was open. I was like, can I have it? And so we had it moved over to where my shelves are for the graphic novels. And so now I actually use that, where I started to use that as a display shelf. So on this slide, I have a couple different iterations. The first one is that first display I did right at the front of the library. We have a different display there right now. And that worked really well. And then the second picture, the one in the middle, that's one of the versions of me putting display books face out on some empty shelves at the graphic novel collection. And that worked really well. And occasionally it was like en route to the bathroom. So every time I walked to the bathroom, I'd see like, oh, that one's empty. What did I have there? Oh, let me go put something else on it when I come back from the bathroom. So, it definitely like got people's attention. And then the one on the right is the display shelves that I pulled over. That is the display that is still currently up in my library. That is the display for March. I did a like strong female character display for Women's History Month. So I tried to pull stuff in there. We'll get to that. Okay, I was like, I have questions to answer. So I also attempted some programming. So again, I'm not an outreach person or anything like that, but we have this program called VMCC Reads, which is like to encourage faculty and students and staff to like talk about books in some way or another. So it was suggested to me that maybe I wanted to do something like that for the graphic novels. And I didn't think that the sort of traditional book club format would work as well for that. And I know there are places that do that, but because I wanted to cast a really wide net and I didn't want to like turn anyone off that easily, I wanted to make it as open as possible. I borrowed a format from New York Public Library. So their Mid-Manhattan branch has a program that they've been doing called Manga Mondays. And the format is what I've used here. Basically, you have a theme each month, and you just come and talk about whatever you like that fits that theme. And it can be anything. The theme could be, just as long as it fits the theme. And if you go off topic, that's okay. It's like very open, but it's more like a way to like share your favorites and like get more title recommendations and maybe talk about the titles a little bit. So less say like, this is what I thought of the themes, and more like, I really like this one, I think you should read it too. And I think that that's, for this type of thing, perfectly valid. So I did it about 4 times, and I never had like a huge turnout. Like I think the most was 5 people. Our students are really busy, and I ran it during our the 2-hour block on the 1 day a week where like they can go to clubs and other events and stuff. So, it was a little hard. So no one ever came back, but the thing that worked well was even when it was like 2 people showed up, a lot of the cases, they saw the posters that we put up around campus, but didn't know that we had a graphic novel collection in the library. So in talking about it and explaining like, yeah, I'm in charge of that collection, this is what I'm doing. And at the end of those sessions, we'd walk back across the hall to where the main library is. We did it in like our group study area near my office. And the main library is across the hall. So we'd walk across the hall, and I'd actually show them where the graphic novels were, and they'd check stuff out. And they'd come back and they'd check more stuff out. So that was good. I felt really good about that. It was like, there were only 2 people here, but the 2 people came and borrowed stuff, and they'll be back. They'll borrow more stuff and get that sort of awareness out. So I felt good. And I put my picture on my slide. Oh, that's my warning. I'm almost done. Put my, this was my poster that I made. I was really proud of it. I was really excited. And then if you can see by the dates, 2 of those were canceled. That's why I've only done 4 of them. One of them I did in the spring, and then the other 2 were canceled. So I tried. I want to get mileage out of it. But yeah, you could see there, like I kind of had open themes for that. So we'll talk about the like current challenges of like now. Our collection's entirely in print. There are titles in Overdrive. There's a lot of titles in Overdrive, but we don't have Overdrive. And the odds of us getting Overdrive for our library are like basically 0 right now, because we have to focus on buying ebooks to support the curriculum, and the ebooks are more expensive than the print books. So it's just, the money's not there, and there's no way we're going to get there through procurement anytime soon. So we can't. We also haven't done any programming in my library since we went remote. So I may try to do something in the fall, but I haven't gotten that far. I'm in the middle of Alma migration. So there's just a lot of unknowns. So I'm going to give some parting advice before switching over to questions. So like, this may seem really overwhelming if you're like, I want to build a collection, but I don't know where to start. Like, unless you live in this world, like I live in this world. Unless you live here, it can seem very overwhelming, but like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Like, that you can get help and people to guide you. You'll be okay. There's no way you can be an expert in every single thing. Like, I know manga, but I don't know every manga title that's ever been published. And I don't know Western graphic novels as well. So, it's a trade-off. Everyone kind of has their niche that they know more than others. And like all collections, it's a work in progress. It's, you know, just be okay with that. It's going to change. You're going to buy something and no one's going to read it, and you're going to buy, and people will ask you for a title you didn't have, and you go, oh, okay, I should get that. And you may not get it on the first try, and that's okay. So with that, I'm going to switch over to questions, and thank you for coming. Let me go back to my Q&A window. So hopefully, so yes, Dana wanted to know, are there library vendors that offer online manga content? Or do any of these publishers offer licensed organizations? I don't know if any of them offer like organizational licenses. I don't think they do, but there are online, like Overdrive does have a large library, but you have to have Overdrive to access that. And you actually have to have those titles in your Overdrive collection, which, fun fact, NYPL has manga in their Overdrive collection. It's a very odd collection. It's old BL manga and then Harlequin manga, and that's basically the whole collection. It's very weird. I hope that answers that. John wants to know, most graphic novel collections I've seen are placed adjacent to YA or near the children's area. Well, that seems somewhat appropriate. I wonder if that reduces adult content. I feel like that's more of like a public library question than a like academic library question. I'm kind of coming from academic libraries here. I think that probably does. I always feel weird in my local public library branch across the street. Like the graphic novels are on the edge of the YA section, and I always feel a little weird going over there. And like, I shouldn't. And there's stuff in there that I don't, like, I'm not their parents. I don't care what they read. But also a little like, oh, I know what's in that one. I don't know if a 14-year-old should read that. So it's kind of interesting. Do we treat these solely as leisure reading, or do we try to connect them to the curriculum? Right now, basically leisure reading. We do have some titles that are curricular or that are used in classes, but not a lot. It's more, we're focused more on the leisure reading. Tom wants to know, is Comixology or DC or Marvel's online service available for libraries? As far as I know, no. It's only for consumers. So libraries can't access that to provide that. An anonymous attendee wants to know, have you worked with your instruction librarians to use graphic novels in your teaching? We have not. It doesn't super, at least as of right now, it hasn't super tied into what any of them have been doing in their classes. They all know the collection's there, but it hasn't come up. So I hope that answers that. If anyone else has any questions, there's like 1 minute left, and then you have to let you have time to mosey over, but or mosey over, like switch links to the other session for the keynote. But my email address is up on the slide, and I do have, again, I'll put it in the chat again in case anyone missed it before. This is my presentation handout, which is sent to all attendees. This is basically, so not only do I have, you know, sort of introduction, but I do have title recommendations by genre, and by like genres that you would be more familiar with if you don't read a lot of manga. So I'm hoping that that's interesting. It's a mix of like things I personally like and things people like from borrowing in my library. So feel free to browse this. Feel free to shoot me an email and ask me any questions. I'm more than happy to talk about graphic novels and manga like at length, as some of you may know. So with that, thank you. And yeah, if anyone wants to like stay in chat for a couple minutes, that's probably okay. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to, it's okay if you leave so you can go to the keynote.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was great.
Welcome. Thank you.